I think it's also important to recognize some of the wider implications of our work. So while we thought that ethics trainings are quite ubiquitous and you find them all over the public and private sector, in reality, when we went to Nepal and Bangladesh, we realized that this is quite a novel instrument in the public service, and specifically for our sectors, including the police in Bangladesh. So therefore, it was something, had not really done before, but it was very positively received. And the evaluation that we received from the participants has, both in Nepal and Bangladesh, been very positive. And I think it's been quite interesting to see that now there's already a lot of interest growing and building up around these current projects to expand these ethics trainings to other institutions, whether it's the local administration in Nepal, or the customs administration, or other areas of the police force in Bangladesh. So what we believe is that at least, the minimum and maybe a good impact to have is one already where we have started a conversation, and hopefully this is the starting point for more initiatives in this field in the future. Now, deep breath. Let's move that into the main body really of the presentation. Starting maybe a little bit with the background of the project itself. Now, you are all anti-corruption researchers and experts in the field, or also in the work in the area of ethics and integrity management. So we all are aware that ethics trainings are quite well known as anti-corruption policy tools, or as key components of ethics programs in the public and private sector. However, if you actually look at the evidence surrounding the impact of ethics trainings on ethical attitudes and ethical behavior, and corruption maybe more broadly, you actually find only a very limited amount of evidence. In the whole areas of public administration, development studies, economics, political science, there are not really reviews or inventories or systematic impact evaluations that would be able to answer the question, can ethics trainings reduce corruption? If you go to the management literature, and mainly on the private sector, you find some material, you find a number of observational studies, but mainly actually with business school students. So it's a very specific population, most of them based in the United States. So at the end of the day, there are quite a lot of resources put into ethics trainings, but we know actually very little about whether these resources are well spent, and we don't quite know whether ethics trainings at the end have a positive impact on ethical behavior and preventing unethical behavior. So therefore, our project aimed to develop an ethics training, a comprehensive ethics training for public servants in Nepal and Bangladesh, and to conduct an impact evaluation by means of a field experiment. Before going into the detail of the project, let me say a few words about our theoretical assumptions. Because we are talking about information provision, learning, training, it was fairly intuitive to go back to Bandura's social learning theory, and this is also reflected in some of the literature that is existing already out there. Now, social learning theory assumes that people, or children originally, right, and people generally change their behavior and learn by observation and by imitating role models, and eventually by applying this in practice. So in other words, for our ethics training, it meant that we wanted to, taking the assumptions, the basic assumptions of social learning theory, it meant that for learning to occur, or for our training to assist learning and subsequently behavioral change, it was important that our training would provide models of positive and negative behavior, in other words, ethical and unethical behavior, so that our police officers or public servants in general can distinguish more easily what is the desired and what is the undesired type of behavior, right? To see those kinds of models. So it was important to include that. Second, learning and subsequently behavioral change would be assisted if we manage to, through the training, provide guidance on rules, laws, ethics codes of conduct, and all kinds of ethical decision-making procedures and decision-making frameworks for our officers, so that they acquire knowledge and confidence and understanding of what to do if they face an ethical dilemma situation. And we give them opportunities to apply this in practice. Now, we could only do this in the training, but ideally, of course, you can also apply this then on the job, and you can reinforce these kinds of applications. And on top of that, we hope that the expectation is that with the ethics training, we raise the salience of ethical issues in general. People talk about it, and it starts to be in people's mind. So in terms of then what we would expect as a result of such an ethics training, it would hopefully, or the expectation is that it would raise ethical awareness. Our officers or public servants would acquire knowledge and strengthen their confidence when confronting ethical dilemma situations. They would update their attitudes towards, also update their expectations towards others. They would change their behavioral intentions and eventually their behavior. This goes back to the theory of reasoned action from Eisen and Fishbein as well. Now, we took this kind of theoretical framework into account when developing our comprehensive ethics training, but of course went beyond that and did a huge inventory of ethics manuals and trainings that we could find from around the world, and obviously had to adapt this to our local context. So conducted a lot of interviews and a screening of material in order to adapt our training really to the world of our subjects, our participants, to make it as relevant as possible in accordance with our theoretical assumptions and requirements. So with this, then, we went off to design specifically an ethical leadership training in Nepal with the tax administration and in Bangladesh with the police. And taking the assumptions or the design of a field experiment, we followed 4 steps. In the first one, we conducted a baseline survey with all our participants. Also like an ethics audit, you could say. Then we moved forward to a treatment group training where we had randomly invited public servants from our population of potential participants. Then we ran the endline survey, and at the end, we still ran the control group training for roughly the 50% of public servants that were not trained during the treatment group training. On that basis, we are able to hope to identify the effect of the ethics training on the ethical attitudes and behavior of our participants. Now, in what I'm going to outline now, I will focus on Bangladesh. Nepal is still in the field. And Bangladesh, we completed this at the beginning of January. I mean, completed is probably not exactly right, because we are still waiting for some performance records, and we are still debriefing on some issues that arose from during the training. But here we have at least something to offer already for the presentation today. Sorry, in Bangladesh, we conducted the training with one police district, namely that one of Comilla, which is located in the southeast of Dhaka. It has about 5.5 million inhabitants. There are 38 police stations, checkpoints, and units, and some 22 headquarter units. So it's quite a large police force there, actually. There are nearly 2,500 officers, too many for our budget and for what we could do. So we nonetheless had to include all the officers at the station level and some selected headquarter units, bringing us up to 1,400, just over 1,400 participants. It's a little bit of attrition, but very minor, actually. So quite a large group of officers that actually received the training and that were interviewed twice for the base and the endline survey. Let me say, before I show you results, a little bit about the leadership training that we developed. Now, as I said already, it took us quite a while to prepare this, not only because of the pandemic, which obviously postponed many things along the way and delayed many of our activities, but the training as such was conceived then as a one-day training. I should say initially we wanted it to be longer, but that is just not really possible in a context of a police that has to be in the field every day. So it became a full one-day training. The groups, the seminar groups, were around 30 persons strong. So altogether, I think we have 42 or so training days that Professor Raman, Professor Islam, and Krishna Kumar Saha conducted. And Krishna, I think, did all the days, all the training days. So he's been really, I mean, the hero, designing, planning and implementing the training and really being present at each and every day there. So thank you from my side here, also really in front of everybody. It's really important to stress that. In terms of the contents of our leadership training, we have an introduction and a conclusion where we would have our participants evaluate the training, and then at the end they would all receive a certificate of completion. And there were like 5 core sections during the day of training. The first one would look at the introduction to ethics and integrity, more from the perspective of personal ethics, personal values, and personal integrity, and then to link it to organizational integrity. Then we talked about policing values. In other words, positive role models were discussed there. Then we talked about police misconduct. In other words, about the negative models of behavior. In that context, we also talked about laws and ethics rules. In other words, providing guidance in accordance with our theoretical requirements. Then we looked at ethical dilemmas, where first of all discussed different types of situations, but then looked again at ethical decision-making methods. And then finally, we looked at ethical leadership, where again, we looked at what it actually is and what strategies are available. And we also looked at role models, again, quite strongly there. All these sessions were very interactive. There was usually like a short introductory component, and then there were handouts and tasks, group events, role play. So it's like the whole range of activities that you can plan. So we really try to keep everybody as engaged as possible. With this in mind, the question is, of course, we have spent a lot of time preparing the training, and Krishna, Tayabur, and Maruf have spent a huge amount of time training our police officers. Has the training actually had any reasonable and sensible impact at the end of the day? So to do that, we collect the evidence from the base and the endline survey in June and December 2020. You see here that the large majority, 95.7% of the participants in the training and in the survey were male. And then there is a group of 15%. These are so-called assistant sub-inspectors and sub-inspectors. They are leading groups of constables when they go on the beat, when they go into the field. So you have here like the superiors, and the constables are the ones really the street level police officers. But it also means we did not train the level above the sub-inspector level. And there's obviously a large chunk of ranks and officers in the higher ranks that did not take advantage of this, did not get this training. That is something to do in the future. Certainly there has already been interest voiced in this direction. So with this then, let's have a look at the, in fact, 3 findings that I summarized already at the very beginning. So first, I would like to talk a little bit about the measurement of unethical behavior and the prevalence of unethical behavior that we found in our population of police officers. And I focus here only on the baseline survey, and I will show you 3 ways of how we actually measured our unethical behavior. I mean, the first one is one that you find often in surveys, where we asked our police officers whether they observed their colleagues engaging in unethical behavior during the last month. So we take a fairly short period of time, the reason being that we have at the very end another survey, and we need to have a period during which we might have we would have wanted to observe a little bit of change. But here I show you now only the baseline survey. And it's interesting when you ask the public servants, it somewhat ranges from 7% for police officers who see their colleagues accepting informal payments, bribes from citizens, to 13.1% for officers who see their colleagues using their position to help a family member or friend, in other words, engage in nepotism. The others are somewhere in between. So we have like using office equipment, theft, basically, using the position to help a party. I mean, it's political corruption, receiving gifts. It's a form of maybe not necessarily monetary financial bribery. So these proportions are quite low. We asked about, these are the ones that said basically, that did not say never. The large majority said, oh, I never saw my colleague doing anything like this. So low and a little bit surprising, but it depends also a bit on the type of corrupt behavior that you're actually looking at. So then we took another perspective, and we gave our police officers in the survey different types of scenarios. And these scenarios involve some sort of at least basic dilemmas, but the answer is still pretty clear what you're supposed to do as a police officer there. So I cannot really read them out all now, it takes a bit too long, but in the first story, an officer is offered a small amount of gratitude money in exchange for letting a driver go home to look after his sick children. And the officer then accepts the small amount of money in order not to cause too much hassle. Probably a pretty standard, something that happens maybe frequently, at least according to anecdotal evidence. In the second story, we look at 2 officers who went to a restaurant, and the owner doesn't want them to pay the tea and the snack that they consumed. He absolutely refuses for them to pay, even after they ask, and in the end they don't want to appear impolite, and so they accept this very kind gesture. So obviously the acceptance of a gift that they shouldn't quite accept. We have a third story that involves nepotism. Again, a similar kind of dilemma, but I'll keep it to 2 here. Now, if you see the results here, the numbers already differ quite a bit from what we saw on the first slide, because there's a good 43% of the officers who basically said that they would accept the offer if they were in the same position than those officers we saw in the story initially. And when it came to the tea and snack scenario, this proportion is even higher at 56.3%. Now, should say the way we measure it, we basically measure all those who do not strongly disagree with the statement that they would have done the same in that situation. But I think what it tells us that once you have dilemmas at work, once you change the situation compared to the direct question we asked earlier, already police officers are drifting more towards an intention to potentially engage in unethical behavior. But it also depends again on the kind of situation that they face. Yeah, and the nepotism question is the intent is even higher there. So given these difficulties of measuring unethical behavior reliably, we used behavioral games or lab in the field tasks as our third mechanism or third measure of unethical behavior. And so we have actually 3 of them, and one of them is one where we ask our officers, our police officers, to complete matrices, basically as basic math tasks. And each of these matrices contains 8 numbers. You see one on the right, and 1 number is missing. Now, the participants then get 10 seconds to find out the missing number. Now, if they indicate that they have found the correct answer on the subsequent slide, they receive a reward of 50 tucker. So clearly there is an incentive to say, oh yes, I got it right, because it gives you 50 tucker. Now, they had 5 matrices, and only the first of the 5 matrices is actually solvable. So the other 4 are not unsolvable, but they are extremely difficult to solve, and certainly in 10 seconds. So we tried this out earlier through a validation study. So in other words, that if one was right, and the one on the right, I'm sure you were able to solve in the meanwhile while I was talking, we can now infer that those officers who claim to have solved an unsolvable matrix is an indicator of their behavioral dishonesty. Now, if you see on this slide here now the evidence for the baseline study, it shows you only the results for the 4 unsolvable matrices, and it means that only the zeros are the ones that have been honest throughout, right? So anybody who has 1, 2, 3, or 4 has effectively cheated once, at least once, or up to 4 times. The mean, the average matrices guessed correctly is 2.2. That's quite a high number. And if you look at the aggregate number there and sum it up, you it means that more than 80% of the participants claim to have solved at least 1 or more matrices correctly, and there are only those 18% with the value of 0 that we can count as honest. So in other words, if you go to behavioral evidence, then actually there is quite some substantive prevalence of unethical behavior among our officers. Now, next, we are looking at the change of ethical attitudes over time. So here we are comparing the base and the endline data. This does not provide evidence of the impact of the ethics training, but it shows very interesting evidence with regard to how ethical attitudes actually may change. And so here I've got one quite funky slide. Kim, thank you again. This looks amazing. So what we did ask in the survey is to ask questions about the rationalization strategies that police officers use in order to justify unethical behavior. So it may be anything like there's very low pay, and therefore sometimes it may be justified to take a small bribe, or the working conditions are so dreadful, and therefore nobody can be blamed for accepting a small amount of money on the side. Now, we ask quite a lot about this, and here's one example where we ask police officers cannot really be blamed if they break procedures if their superiors told them to do so in the first place, so they blame it on their superior. Now, you would expect that it's relatively stable as a response over time, but in fact, we have only 39% of our officers who provided the same answer in June and in December, in other words, 6 months later. You also see that the development goes in all kinds of directions, yeah? And in fact, the mean is quite similar in the two periods, but nonetheless, there's quite a lot of instability and fluctuation. Now, this is a bit surprising because most of the time we would have expected this to be a bit more stable, but it also, I think, raises questions. Where's this fluctuation coming from, right? I mean, I think we don't have good answers for that, not just us generally. And at the same time, it has some implications for our training, because it means that with the training, we can probably have an impact on those ethical attitudes, but we might actually need to have more regular impacts in order, regular trainings in order to, just address this kind of instability. Now, with this in mind, let me then come to my last piece of evidence here about the effect of the ethics training, where we have some very preliminary evidence, and I've got one example here to show you that I think is fairly plausible. So what you can see here is that, first of all, the basic message here is that the ethics training can make a difference for ethical attitudes, right? So here the evidence is, the focus that we take is one question. And this is a question where we ask our officers that whether they think that they can decline a gift when it is offered to them. So, and these gifts are these questions come in response to the scenarios that I showed you earlier. So it indicates some form of behavioral control, some form of confidence. I'm confident to actually address such an ethical dilemma situation, and I'm confident that I can actually decline such a gift if I'm offered one, right? So here what we see is that in the dashed line, you can see that it's further up on the right in December than the straight line. And that indicates that that there has been a positive impact of the training on this particular attitude. Yeah. So I leave it here for now, but you will also see it's quite interesting that actually the straight line is slightly negatively sloped, right? So I think if there had been no ethics training, we would have seen that for everybody. So the ethics training, in a way, provided a mechanism to stem some kind of sliding on the unethical attitude scale, we could call it like that. So with this in mind, let me come to my conclusion, and it's time to conclude anyhow, I think. So we have a few conclusions from the field experiment itself. It's very early days, so I'm a little bit hesitant to draw too much from it for the time being. Clearly, according to our behavioral games, we find quite high prevalence of unethical behavior among police officers. We do find that ethical attitudes change more than we thought in a short period of time, which might, as a recommendation, imply the need or a recommendation to monitor on a more regular and continuous basis ethical attitudes and behavior, and to understand why they actually change as much as they do. And when it comes to the ethics training, I mean, we can see a first effect, but again, we have to be careful here. This is a preliminary finding, and we are still doing more analysis, and it will take us probably another 2 or 3 months before we are really done with all of that. I think it's also important to take a few practical points away from the research so far. And here I focus on Bangladesh, but I also open up a little bit to Nepal. As I said, it was interesting for us to see that ethics trainings are relatively uncommon in the administration. I mean, what you see is that in the civil service, which, in the top ranking civil servants, they get an induction training when they join the civil service. In Bangladesh and Nepal, it's the same. And when they get the induction training, they have an hour at some point, a session about the code of conduct. That's it, really. And so this means there's a large chunk of public servants below the top ranks, the largest proportion, of course, who don't ever get any training such as this one. And even those top civil servants only get it really at the beginning of their career. There may be some occasional trainings that we don't really know about, but that doesn't apply to the police apparently, and to the tax administration. In other words, there is actually a lot of scope for investing in this area of work and ethics and integrity management and building integrity. Also, I think officers really appreciated that they could come out and participate in the training. We also got a lot of positive feedback from superiors, many of whom say like that and want to expand this. So in Bangladesh specifically, there's quite a bit of interest in maybe rolling this out to other police districts. There has been a lot of push to say, well, maybe higher ranks should be more involved in this because it's also a leadership training. And we are considering maybe in the medium term some collaboration with the police training academy, and then we are talking about many thousands of police officers who might get trained. But I guess we need to finish this off first of all, but at least there's quite a bit of interest, and maybe Tayabur and Maruf can say a bit more about it. In Nepal, we work with the tax administration, but the kind of feedback is very similar there. It's the first time they do anything like this, and there are already requests to expand this to the customs administration and the local government administration, which would be certainly beyond our capabilities, I think, to do that. But of course, we can try maybe with global integrity in the future. There are also ideas about more initiatives, building ethics manuals, having ethics officers and committees and so on. So there are lots of discussions that have come out of this initial initiative. And I think this is at least giving us a kind of a positive feedback in terms of the work that we have done there. How to make it work, I think that's also important to raise. I mean, it's quite clear that in both countries, without the support of the leadership of the police and the tax administration, we wouldn't have gone anywhere. That was absolutely essential. And we are very, very grateful to them, the direct leadership of the district police, for instance, but also further up in the hierarchy. It's absolutely essential to adapt and tailor the training to the organizational context that requires quite a bit of preparation, but it's worth doing it. I think it certainly reflects also the insights of Mark Pyman's and Paul's work on curbing corruption and sectoralizing really anti-corruption work. And clearly in terms of the approach to training, I mean, experiential learning, face-to-face learning, making it applied, having top quality trainers, which we were lucky to have, and having a right training environment where officers like to come to, for instance, in our case, in the headquarters of the police, are quite important. At the same time, we have to remain realistic, right? So, I mean, even if we have positive feedback, the fundamentals in Bangladesh are probably not right for the training to have a huge impact in the short, medium, and long term, because salaries for the lower ranks remain low, working conditions are not good, internal relations are not always the best. So I think we have to be realistic of what we can achieve, right? And I think on this note, I can leave it and say thank you very much for your attention, and maybe stop sharing if Veronica asks me to do so.
Thanks so much, Jan. I'm going to start off with a series of questions, but please, everybody, if you have any questions or would like to raise your hand and ask directly, I'm happy for that too. So Jan, I had a sort of a two-part question. I'm not sure if these parts are connected, but I was wondering if you, just especially in terms of scale, had considered doing any of this stuff online in terms of the training itself, and if you how you feel like that would change things, if that was something that was part of your methodology, and just in terms of scaling this in the future. I really loved your 5-modality one. The 5 questions was great, and some of the stuff, to me, it reads almost really easily as something somebody would do online. And I know other researchers, I know Mark is doing work like that for Transparency International, maybe not for the specific ethics behavior. So I'm just curious if that was something you considered. And then the flip side of that question is that specifically in the context of South Asia, I mean, definitely everywhere, but you can see a lot of the reports from Grameen talking a lot about just the nature of socialization. And I know you were saying that there was 30 participants in the group, and I'm curious if there was a training of trainers model, so that there was some sense of there were smaller groups, just sort of the way that Grameen kind of has built itself out. And I was curious how that would relate to scale too. So I guess both of those questions are around scalability as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, shall I go straight back to your question?
Yeah, you can, and then I'll call on Liz afterwards.
Yeah, okay, good. No, thank you. Thank you. Both questions are really good. And I mean, looking forward, they're probably extremely important. On the online training, I mean, that is something we had to consider very seriously, right? I mean, we were supposed to travel out to Bangladesh and then, yeah, COVID struck. And from that moment onwards, Tayabur, Maruf and I had weekly calls. So, I mean, there was a point when we were not sure whether we will ever be able to run this training. And one plan B would have been to run an online training. But we really, really wanted to avoid that because from all that we had read about trainings and about learning, I think there was a very strong feedback and argument that the experiential face-to-face learning would be more effective, especially in a context where the officers have never done any ethics training, right? It's the first time that they're exposed to it. Technological environment may not really lend itself to doing that. So it was, in Nepal, we were discussing this at some point because it requires more travel around the country. But we just said that it's probably going to fail like that. We are not there yet. Yeah. So this also means, I think going forward, it would make it maybe cheaper, it would make it more scalable, but I would still be quite hesitant. I think I would always, at the minimum, I would try a hybrid model. Yeah, where you just meet everybody in the classroom, you make sure you create a bit of a cours d'esprit, you know, they know the teachers, they know the material, they know the expectations. And then you add in maybe some digital elements, and you have the odd session maybe online, but otherwise the core, I think, should remain face-to-face. But of course, I'm happy to be convinced otherwise if someone has the right model then. On the South Asian context and the training of trainers, so here we have two issues. I mean, 30 participants, I mean, maybe Krishna and Maruf, I'm sure whether Tayabur is here as well by now, can say a few words about, you know, the dynamics of having 30 plus people in the room. We had the impression that if we go too low in the numbers, that might not be ideal for learning either, right? Because, you know, you might not have everybody showing up, and so all kinds of issues. So 25 to 30 seemed to be a kind of a good number, and then there was obviously a budgetary issue to it. But going forward, for Bangladesh, we haven't really trained any other trainers yet, but for Nepal, because we're already thinking about the local administration and the customs administration, there's already an effort to bring in more people who will now in the control group training work together with our collaborator so that they actually will be trained to provide the training in the future in other institutions, provided, of course, you know, we will have one day the means to actually do it, right? But so this is something that we are already considering, you know, training trainers. It's part of our discussion already. But maybe I can pass this question about the dynamics of 30 plus people also to Krishna and Maruf. Ambika, do you?
Yeah, that would be great. And I know Krishna has a question. Liz, I do see your hand up. Is it okay if I take Krishna's sort of response and question first?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Liz. Krishna?
Hello. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ambika. And thank you, Jan. It was really fascinating presentation and wonderful. And congratulations from here in Belgium. So responding to your first question, Ambika, this online dimension, I think, you know, like as Jan mentioned, I was in all the trainings, all the training days for 42 days since I was living in Kumilla. So I had this privilege to be there every day, organizing, of course, and managing logistics. So some of the police officials, they're like really old. I mean, old. They are in the service. So I mean, so one guy I specifically remember. So he's going to retire the very next day when he attended the training. And so there he's like, you know, I mean, what I'm going to do with the training. But since he was in the treatment group, so we had to call him. So just to do the just to fill up the condition. So and keeping all these people in the same room for the whole day, because, you know, in Bangladesh, police is busy. I mean, they love keeping busy themselves. So I think it was given all these conditions, bringing them from different parts of the district. So, you know, like some parts where they work and come to the headquarters in the district, it takes like 3 hours in the transport, like even in the private transport. So we provided private transport just to make sure they do not, because there was also condition from the police headquarters that we do not want our forces to be in the public because of the COVID. There was a high rate of COVID infection. So and once they are in the district, so then it becomes the different dimension, because to keep all these officers in the same place for, let's say, the whole day, because when they are in the district, they also want to do some other stuff. They have like remained for some days. For example, in where we train, it's a police headquarters, so they want to go meet their friends. They want to go and do some other administrative stuff for their job. So going online would not. I don't see much hope there. Given all these participants we trained, like all these 1,400 participants. But maybe for the senior officials, we had this conversation with Jan and our fellow professors from Bangladesh, Professor Maruf and Professor Taibu. So all these senior officers might be done, but not much for this level from the SI and these constables. And the second one with this training of the trainers, I think. So we had these two professors from Dhaka University who were conducting the training, and myself, I was as a co-trainer there. Since we are working in a university in Bangladesh, so they were respectful to us. But when sometimes the police officers, we invited some of the police officers to conduct one session at least, because since they were with us, so they seem to be putting their own hierarchical training domination in a way. I don't know if that makes sense to you. So since they are the senior police officers, this junior police officer would not say anything in front of them. But when we were in the training room and there was no officer, and we ensured them it is going to be very anonymous, so they started opening up like really open book. So I think training the trainers maybe from other different university professors, yes, but I would not really recommend training of the trainers of the police officers. That's from my side. Maybe here is Professor Kazi Maruful Islam and Professor Taibur Rahman. They might add something to our conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you once again, Jan and Ambika. Bye.
Thank you, Krishna.
Thank you. May I, Ambika? This is Kazi Maruful Islam. Thank you. Thank you so much. Just I'll not take long. Just to focus on the very aspect of like classroom dynamics. Although the setting seems to be a very classroom kind of setting, but in fact we stressed on 3 points. Number one is peer learning, and in fact the way the training module is designed, it focused on sharing the experience among the training participants. And we also organize a series of group works inside the training session, and we actually focus more on the experience sharing among the participants. So these 3 components made the training session as a kind of a very lively learning space. And in fact, the facilitator or the trainers, their role was just to enable the environment so that it can be developed as a sort of a co-learning space. And that is the beauty of the training program. As Krishna said, that in fact one of the big challenges was to make them participate in the program. I mean, you can have, like, you can see that they're sitting there as a kind of a participant, but that's not all about participation. We stressed on the active participation, and for active participation we needed to remove the hierarchy that exists within the service. And actually that was something we were able to do, that and they opened up their feelings and the shared experience. And one a police officer, he learned from others how he handled the situation when they confronted unethical behavior, and they started learning like how to come over from the ethical dilemma situation. So that was kind of thing. So I guess still the way the training is designed, it's of course it's not really designed to cope with this online kind of modality. maybe, but I'm sure there are some more potential. I mean, if we bring in some hybrid kind of methodology, which is like you have to get things on ground in a classroom setting or a kind of a seminar setting, and then you can add some other elements through online. That can work, but we haven't done it yet. So we just cannot make any conclusion that whether that would going to work. But I guess that may work, but we have to conduct some kind of experimentation before we design or change the methodology. All right, so thank you. It's over to you, Ambika. I'm here, so we'll be very happy to respond to any of other questions from the distinguished participants. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you,
I'm sure
Maruf.
people definitely have questions for you. Liz, if you want to go next.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Jan, and other members of the team. Really interesting research. We know that when it comes to both the police and people working in tax authorities, in many countries, you might have a kind of selection bias with the people who go into those jobs. Where there is prevalent corruption, you might be more likely to attract people who are going into those jobs because they see opportunities to extract bribes. And similarly, sometimes within organizations, particularly I think within the police, getting allocated to be on the traffic police job might be something that is used to reward people, again, because there are lots of opportunities to extract bribes if you're in the traffic police. So I was thinking about that and wondering if you might be able to delve into that with your research in terms of whether you've got the possibility of separating out, say, police in different roles and seeing if they have different attitudes and maybe different responses to the training. Similarly, potentially, whether you could look at different levels and ranks, which might give you some insights into whether you get kind of socialization effects. Do you get people sort of coming in clean and then getting socialized into this the more years they've been in the service and that kind of thing? So just wondered if you could, if the data will allow you to reflect on any of those things. And would also just be more interested to hear more around the discussions on the vignettes and whether they shed any light on social norm pressures on this kind of behavior, and in particular whether any of the rationalizations that you mentioned that you test in the survey, whether those are coming out spontaneously in the vignettes. For example, well, this person would be reasonable to do that because they're paid poorly, etc.
Awesome, thanks, Liz. Jan, if you want to ask Kim or Christian or Krishna or Kazi, lots of Ks today. But yeah, if you'd like to ask anybody else as well, feel free to bring them in.
Of course, I mean, if Kim, do you want to answer Liz's question? Do you want to have a first step at it?
I can, sure. So the answer is both positive and negative. The answer basically is for everything Liz said, that we can do it, but we haven't done it yet. So that's the sort of the boring answer, real quick. We did ask about social norms in relation to the scenarios, where we looked at whether participants believed that their family would want them to take the office, their colleagues would want them to take the office, and their superiors would want them to take the office. So there's actually quite a granular set of measures for at least the sources of social norms. So yeah, we can look at that. We can also, to some limited degree, look at the tasks that people do. Traffic police we're able to separate out, but we haven't done it yet because there's some data cleaning that still is to be done before we even sort of are fully willing to trust the numbers that you saw. We trust them for now, but like Jan said, it's still early days on the data side. But the good news is we will get there.
Christian, do you also want to say something about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think one of the things that we are excited about is understanding that heterogeneity. So in a pre-analysis plan for the field experiment, we basically had wild discussions about who would be more or less treated by something like an ethics training, right? Is it the person that selects into a corrupt job and is more dishonest? And so you have sort of more margin for reducing dishonesty because they're more dishonest to start with. Or is it someone that is less dishonest and you have less margin to reduce dishonesty but they might be more amenable to listening to you in the ethics training. So we have these heterogeneous assumptions or heterogeneous hypotheses or treatment effects in the pre-analysis plan, but we haven't looked at them. But it's something I think we're very excited about, because I think it helps us understand something broader about who can be shaped by these kind of ethics and value interventions and who not.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I can only say that I agree with what they said. And the one thing that I would like to add to Liz's question is that what we cannot really do is compare tax and police or so and other sectors. We don't know whether those that select into the police are generally more corrupt than those that become school teachers, simply because we only have one sector to look at. I mean, we have the tax administration in Nepal, but it doesn't tell us anything about comparing this to police officers in Bangladesh. Yeah, thank you. Liz.
That makes more sense. I know that you touched on this a little bit briefly towards the end, and I know we're almost at time, but can you talk a little bit about how this relates to the Nepal work and why Nepal and Bangladesh? Because to me, they're two very, very, very different countries in terms of how they're structured in this way. So why pair them? And also, was it that you scaled a lot of the work you were doing here in Bangladesh to Nepal, or if you could just talk a little bit about that comparative work, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Ambika. Good question. So clearly, it's sometimes difficult then to justify the case selection in the work. But in this case, because it's a phase 2 of the ACE project, the ACE program, we had conducted civil service surveys in Bangladesh and Nepal, and we had conducted them in 10 countries. But I mean, Nepal and Bangladesh, especially, I mean, Nepal initially were countries where it was very evident that there was an issue surrounding ethical awareness and ethical behavior. What happened already before we started with this research is that, for instance, the tax administration wrote a new strategic plan and included issues such as we need to do more integrity management and adopt a code and maybe do some trainings. So this, and then we came, I mean, you published the Global Integrity ACE program. And so there was simply demand from a government agency, you could say, yeah. So that I think explains best why it was Nepal in that time and why it was the tax administration. And in Bangladesh, it was similar. And so far as we had already contacts to the police from the previous work, yeah. And at the same time, I mean, they are still from the same region, so I mean, there's a lot to learn from comparing them. When we conducted our trainings, we started with Nepal initially, right? And the plan has been right from the beginning to at least keep them as comparable as possible, so that we can later really, put the two countries together in our analysis and then see what we get out of it.
Awesome, thanks. Does anybody else have any questions specifically, maybe for Krishna or Kazi? I'm really happy that you're here. Anybody else has anything? Liz, your hand is still up, but I don't know if it's just outstanding. Okay. And Jan, Kim, and Christian, did you guys have any questions now that you're presenting this the first time to Krishna or Kazi?
If there is not much question, maybe I can add a little bit on the issue of like different placement for like this bribe thing Liz mentioned. So the thing is, in Bangladesh, I mean, traffic police is not really a lucrative position. So people usually don't want to go in the traffic. They just want to be in the regular policing, like this criminal investigation thing. So there is this option of, I mean, these general police, they also deal with the drugs and all that. So that makes it, that makes the general policing a bit more lucrative than the traffic one. But so the issue of this placement and target achievement, they are like in general policing, in general, Bangladesh police is struggling with this generalization of the performance evaluation system. So for example, there's one particular officer with the same rank who is posted in a very remote area in Bangladesh. He doesn't get to like investigate a lot of police cases, a lot of criminal cases, but the person who is posted in a city area who has more potential to investigate more cases and get promotion more early. So that's makes it a bit challenging for the people who are working in the rural areas to get the promotion a bit earlier. So coming back to the leads point, I think yes. So and I think also, Jan, you can also differentiate, because we also have this point where they come from. I mean, where they're located. So maybe, as Liz mentioned, we can actually extract that data like that. And I think Professor Kazi Maruful Islam, he is also,
yeah.
Yeah.
No, Krishna, I agree. And I mean, as Kim has said as well, and Christian, I mean, we can obviously do quite a bit of within group analysis there, whether it's different ranks, different positions, different stations, different roles that they have. Yeah. So that's part of our job for the next couple of months.
Kazi, did you have any last words?
Yeah, just yeah. Thank you once again to the whole team. Just to add one thing, as you already Jan, Kim already explained, that we are in a data cleaning phase, so we just cannot give you any kind of firm findings from the data at this stage. But two things is very important, which I guess part of the findings. Number one is like, we saw, and the initial findings clearly shows that the police officers are keen to change their attitude. So, and this sort of intervention works. I mean, we just cannot tell you the degree of change or the extent of change, but it's clear that change is possible. This is number one kind of observation. Number two is, no matter what findings come up from the whole this experimental research or action research, but the process itself is very, very important. I mean, it already created sort of interest, and it really created sort of a stimulation among the police officers and their thinking, and they are going, when they are going back to their work, they're actually re-examining their position, re-examining their values, and re-examining their pattern of behavior. So, and a sort of a normative discourse have been created among the police officers, which we located, in fact, throughout the training. We saw their feelings. We have recorded their comments. A whole lot of comments are there. So it clearly shows that the process already has created some impact on ground. So maybe we need to devise another kind of methodology to capture this impact, but impact is already there. So it seems that I mean I can tell you, being in Bangladesh for the whole of my life, I haven't seen this sort of training, this sort of research activities among any component of the civil service, not alone police. So it's a kind of a huge sort of an initiative that's a breakthrough initiative, and I'm really looking forward to see the findings, and hopefully we'll be able to show you some kind of, in a way, quote unquote, revolutionary findings. I mean, very interesting and significant findings in the coming months. So thank you very much for your support, Ambika, and of course we appreciate GI and for being generous to support the whole initiative. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, that's those breakthrough innovations, Jan. That's exactly the type of stuff you want to hear from your key stakeholders. So that's incredible. And a really nice.
You have taken notes. I hope you have taken notes.
A really nice note to end on. Please stay tuned. Next week we actually have two events. So we will have one on Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern, and then as well as on Thursday. So we hope to see you then. And I really wanted to say again, thank you very much to Kazi and Krishna and everybody else for joining, and really appreciated everybody's inputs. Thank you.